At the end of last year, I asked 12 friends to recommend me a book, and today I will be talking about the first of these recommendations given to me by my friend Adam. Adam, who you can find on Instagram as Adam Tries Books, is a Scottish book reviewer. I've connected with him mostly on Instagram, but also a little bit on Twitter as well. And you know, I love meeting Scottish book people because they put Scottish books on my radar. And also what I really enjoy about following Adam is that he's quite into the Scottish book scene. He goes to events, things like that. So I feel like through him, I kind of know what's happening. He does read a lot of horror, which I also love, but he also reads in other genres such as fantasy, science fiction, thrillers, crime. So you'll be able to find pretty varied recommendations in his account. So I highly suggest you go and follow him. And Adam, he recommended to me his top favorite book of 2022, which is honestly a lot of pressure because I don't want to talk bad about people's favorite books, but I also gotta be honest. So anyways, that book is Reaper Country by Jack Harding, and this is actually a book that was first published in 2022 as well, and I was immediately intrigued because it is a short story collection, and I feel like short story collections are rarely people's favorites of the whole year because I guess they just don't hit as hard as novels do. At least not for me. It's just really hard to connect to that level with short fiction. This is Michelle's Melancholia, where we read books to fear and shed a tear, and in this video we will find out what I thought about Reaper Country. So I started reading Reaper Country by Jack Harding. I've read the introduction, the prologue, and the first short story, and I have so many thoughts already. So the introduction is written by someone else, and it's just an explanation of the concept behind the collection. And basically what it says is that it is inspired by Jack the Ripper and obviously the awful crimes he committed, but the stories are not about Jack the Ripper himself, but are completely fictional stories that just happen in that place in Whitechapel in London at the time that Jack the Ripper was active. And the introduction also talks a little bit about these crimes, like mentioning who the victims were and things like that. But because I'm really not too familiar with any of these cases, I did feel a need to go to Wikipedia and just get like the general idea of what we know and don't know about the murders and Jack the Ripper himself. So I did have to pause and I just did like 15 minutes of reading online. I just want to have a little bit more context. And it was actually very helpful because then in the prologue, which is now written by Jack Harding, I did notice some references that you would really only pick up if you have some prior knowledge about the Jack the Ripper murders, I suppose. The prologue was written with like the narrator speaking directly to the reader, kind of like breaking the fourth wall, which is a style that I don't usually like a lot, but it was not too bad. I guess what the author is trying to do is just get the reader really immersed in the Victorian London. So he's just introducing us to the place where we are and the people we see. And I guess some of those characters will appear in some of the stories, and some of the characters are real people related in some way to Jack the Ripper. Then before the first story, we had a poem, and it said in the text that the poem was either found or sent by police or something, and I tried to check if this was actually the case. So I tried to look it up online, but nothing came up, so I think this is fictional. And then I read the first story, which was The Cat's Meat Man, something like that. It's about this guy who works at a butcher's or I forgot the name, where animals get killed for human consumption. I just can't remember the word in English, sorry. But anyways, this guy keeps some of the meat to feed some street cats. And I really enjoyed this story. It was really creepy. The writing style is very interesting. The authors sometimes go into these sections where it reads very lyrical. It has a really nice rhythm to it, but it's not maintained throughout the whole thing. And I mean, it's only the first story, but I'm really enjoying it. It definitely seems like sort of an experimental kind of book, because as I said, there are different writing styles, different perspectives, then you have the poems, there are some illustrations. So I don't know if at some point it's going to become a bit much, but so far I am very intrigued. So I'll keep reading and report back. I've now reached the halfway point of the book, so I thought it would be a good time to update. And it has been a very interesting reading experience. I have many thoughts about it. To be super honest, after I read the second story, I got a bit worried because the first and the second are very similar in terms of the basic premise. So I was worried that it would just get too repetitive at some point. But then I read more and more stories, and they are actually very different from each other. There's a really nice variety, not only in what the stories are about, but also the narrative devices, I guess. So, for example, some stories are told in the first person or the third person, and there's even one which is second person. So it's saying you are a child and you are doing this and that. And it also appears that some of the stories incorporate supernatural elements, while some of them stick to more realistic type of horror. But I think my favorite part is that after a few stories, you start to notice that all of them are interconnected. And they all contribute something to painting this picture of what was happening in that part of London at that time. I don't think there's really like overarching plot. It's just to, as I said, create like a complete picture of all the things that are happening. And I think I've mentioned many times before that I really enjoy books like these where the reader has to connect different parts of a puzzle. So this is not like a very complicated puzzle. It's just really entertaining to recognize characters and events that happen across the different stories. Also, originally I was thinking of saying which stories were my favorite in the collection, because I know that a lot of people don't like reading short story collections cover to cover, but prefer to pick and choose certain stories. But I really don't think that's something you can do with this one. As I said, it's because they're interconnected, but not only that, also many of the stories don't have a plot, or there's not a lot happening. I would say that more than a collection of short stories, to me, or the way I would describe it, is a series of vignettes. So it's more like scenes that you get to read about, and then after you read a few, you start putting like the movie together. And I think this is a great strategy because it's really difficult to write a short story collection, I suppose, because there's always some stories that are just much stronger than the others. But in this case, because all of them contribute, even the weaker ones, I end up remembering and extracting something of value from them. So I guess in general, I would say that I'm really enjoying this. It started a bit slow, but I promise once you start figuring out how all of these stories fit together, I start getting really hooked. And also I'm quite impressed by the variety. The stories range from very understated, suspenseful, atmospheric stories to others that are very fast-paced and gory and violent. So clearly the author can write in very different styles. So, yeah, I'm excited just to continue reading and seeing what else there is to find out about this world, and I'll update you soon. Okay, welcome back. I was actually planning to film another update at 75% through, but I feel like the stories towards the end of the book were longer than the ones at the beginning, so it didn't really make sense to give an update where I just read one story. So I just saved my final thoughts for this moment. I will say that at about the halfway point of the book, we really turned a corner. All the little connections that I had been picking up across the stories start to solidify to really paint the big picture. And let me tell you, it's a pretty creepy picture. So, towards the end of the book, I went from hesitantly liking it to really, really enjoying it in a way that was very unexpected and surprising. And I mean this in the very best of ways. I really feel like the book took me in a journey through all different kinds of horror, some real life, some supernatural, some very understated, some very violent and gory. And I think the author was very successful in creating a kind of fictional time capsule that really captured what daily life was like in Whitechapel at the time that Jack Ripper was out there brutally killing women. I think he really communicated the state of fear that people lived in every day, and that almost paranoid feeling of suspecting everyone around you. And I appreciated how he very candidly incorporated the very misogynistic and anti-Semitic sentiments that a lot of people had at the time, and that unfortunately shaped not only public perception of the crimes but also how the investigation itself was carried out. And in that same vein, because this book is inspired in real life events where real women were killed and in quite horrible ways, I do want to mention that the author approaches these events with a lot of empathy, and in general I got the impression that he was being very respectful to the victims. I mentioned at the beginning of the vlog that when I started reading, I dedicated about 15 minutes to research a little bit about Jack the Ripper, but you absolutely don't need to. I think one big strength of this book is that if you know absolutely nothing about this case, you will enjoy it, because you will be wondering at every turn of the page whether what you're reading is fact or fiction. And if you know a lot about Jack the Ripper, you will also really enjoy this book, because you will be able to identify all the references that have been woven into the stories. That being said, while I was reading the book, I did start to feel myself being sucked into the Jack the Ripper rabbit hole. I listened to a couple of podcasts about the theories, the suspects, and I will actually be following up this book with 2 other reads. The first book I want to read is a nonfiction called The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper. And this talks about the lives and backstories of the 5 women that are widely accepted to have been victims of this killer. And I think this book attempts to rehumanize these women and maybe put the spotlight on them for a change in a way that doesn't sensationalize the things that happen to them. The other book I also want to read is the graphic novel From Hell, which has been recommended to me in the past, but I was never that much into Jack the Ripper until now, so now I want to read it. And I think this is in a similar style, where some of the real events are fictionalized and made or built into a fictional plot. And I do really, really appreciate when a book does this to me, where I just need to keep researching and I want to follow up with other kinds of reading. I just think it's really special when a book stimulates your curiosity in this way. So, final thoughts. First of all, this book was so fun to read. I really enjoyed the experimental and playful style in which the author wrote the stories, and I will definitely be reading more from Jack Harding. My final rating for this book is 4 stars, so thank you so much, Adam, for your recommendation. Let me know in the comments if you have read this, or if, based on what I said, would you be interested in reading it? Also, if you know of more books about Jack the Ripper that you think I might like or I might find interesting, please leave me your recommendations below, and I will see you on my next video, hopefully very soon. Goodbye!